What's your most impactful single statement or takeaway from the age of disclosure? So I asked this to my X followers and I got a ton of responses actually. 60,000 views is a lot for me on X and over 300 replies. Welcome to Lehto Files. I'm Chris Lehto, retired F-16 pilot. Now I look into UAPs. In this video, we'll look into probably the most anticipated UFO documentary or movie of all time. We'll look at how it's doing out at the box office. We'll look at your reactions to this. And at the end, I'll give my own reactions to the age of disclosure. Thanks for being here. Please consider hitting the like button and sharing this video. It's very difficult to find my videos on YouTube anymore. Oh. But I'm glad you're here. Let's see what you guys think about the age of disclosure. Chris Lehto. Welcome to Lehto Files. The Age of Disclosure is a 2025 feature documentary that dropped on Amazon Prime after a limited Oscar-qualifying theatrical run in New York, LA, and DC. It was shot quietly over about 3 years in secret, and it's built almost entirely around on-the-record testimony from 34 former U.S. government, military, and intelligence insiders. So that means task force leads like Jay Stratton, people tied to the Wilson Davis story, plus pilots, intel folks, and members of Congress like Marco Rubio and Kristen Gillibrand, Tim Burchett you see there. The core claim of the film is pretty simple but huge, that there's been roughly an 80-year international crash retrieval and reverse engineering program involving, you guessed it, non-human technology. Basically a Manhattan Project on steroids. That's how Jay Stratton refers to it. And that's been running in the dark since World War II. In terms of how it's doing out in the wild, the numbers are pretty interesting. On IMDb, it's sitting at around 7 out of 10 from a couple thousand ratings. That's not too bad. On Rotten Tomatoes, the gap is even bigger. So critics are down around the 30% range, while the audience score is in the 90s, so 93%. So reviewers are pretty skeptical, but regular viewers, especially people already following the UAP topic, are rating it very highly. On Prime, it's positioned as a premium release. So that's $20, $19.99 to rent and a bit more to buy in the US, which is higher than like your casual Friday night doc rental and has sparked some debates by itself. You'll see that definitely in the comments here shortly. Money-wise, the producers haven't released an official budget or box office total yet, so we don't have hard revenue numbers, but just looking at the production value, the 3-year timeline, the festival premiere, and the theatrical run, this is clearly not like a YouTube shoestring project. So it's operating in that mid to high tier indie documentary space. But it has mainstream coverage from big outlets, and so far a very loud split between skeptics and believers. And that split is exactly why I think it's worth breaking down the reaction to my post about it and what you're all actually saying in the comments. What else do you want to know? It came. So how did X viewers react to this post? If you want to add to the post, you can go to that link in the description. Here's the raw engagement snapshot. Views 60,354. This is quite high for me. On an X post, I usually get like 3 to maybe 10,000. Total replies, 307. So 1 out of every 200 viewers actually replied. I thought that was pretty interesting. And then total interactions, that's 1,042 likes, reposts, quotes, bookmarks, and replies. So we'll specifically go through the replies. So based on 307 replies, you guys are deeply divided. 52% of the replies were negative or skeptical. Positive impactful was 38%, and then neutral was 10%. So you guys are slightly negative on the age of disclosure, which is kind of par for the course, I think, in the UAP community. Top reply themes by volume was number 1, the PSYOP, the controlled narrative. So I would say most of the negative comments, people that don't like the age of disclosure, is they don't like the controlled narrative, the PSYOP, which they argue is from insiders. So counterintelligence, Lou Elizondo basically is the main narrative of the film follows him along, and he was a counterintelligence operative, right? What does a counterintelligence operator do? They're security of our forces, right? Analyzing enemy intelligence operations. So they're not really into PSYOP. It's really base security and looking at our systems, blue systems, and making sure they don't have any vulnerabilities and looking at enemy adversary capabilities. So his background really isn't in like psychological operations. I'm sure he's aware of it, but really it's looking into what can the enemy gain against our system. So he's anti enemy intelligence. He's counter intelligence, if that makes sense. Second most negative claim with 30% of the replies was nothing new, recycled info. So basically everything that we've heard over the last 4 to 5 years, or really since the 2017 article, if you've been paying attention as closely as I know many of you have, then it's not going to be anything new. But for me, I did hear some actual new things. There was a couple new Air Force witnesses I hadn't seen before, and I was happy to see some Air Force people coming out because the Air Force, as you guys know, has been completely silent on this whole topic, like suspiciously silent. Number 3, they thought was the most impactful statement or event in the film was the talk of the warp drive, space-time physics. And yeah, we had Hal Puthoff in the film, we had Eric Davis in the film, and they have come out on other podcasts, Joe Rogan, etc., talking about these warp drive space-time physics. So people were excited about those statements. Number 4 was the witness credibility. They thought that was a plus, a big moment for the age of disclosure. And I agree, right? You had Jay Stratton, Eric Davis, Marco Rubio, the Bush story, Kirsten Gillibrand, just had a lot of very credible witnesses, and especially for the mainstream audience, which when we get to my reaction, I think that's who this film is aimed at. 5th we had was the intentional crash theory. Thought that was interesting. We've heard that a lot, actually, that we are shooting them down. If you followed Jake Barber, his claims that we actually have a cross retrieval program, and part of that program is to actually shoot these things down, to lure them in and shoot them down. So it was interesting to see that in the age of disclosure and so many somewhat details released, at least from credible people talking about it. Number 6, what people talked about was mortality rate and urgency. And so that bucket was basically about time running out in 2 different ways. So number 1 is that witnesses are old and dying off. So a lot of people were pointing out how many of the key insiders in the film are late career or retired, and they're from the Cold War, early black program eras. And I think this makes sense. A lot of the people I've talked to, whistleblowers or just people going public, are people that essentially feel they have nothing to lose at this point. And really that's career and credibility, right? Once you get old enough, you just don't care what other people what other people think, right? You know who you are by that point, you know what you stand for, and you don't necessarily need the career or the money, or you've already retired. So I think a lot of people are just older because at that point they feel they have much less to lose than someone who's younger. So what do we hear? These guys don't have many years left. We need full disclosure now. And also they're finally talking because they're close to the end of their careers and lives. And I think that is true in a lot of ways. The second one was the point was suspicious deaths and danger. So basically an urgency to act. So that was a smaller subset. It was more conspiratorial, and they were talking about unusual or early deaths around the UFO world. So there's a high mortality among people who push too hard on this. And there's a fear that people will be silenced or that the truth will just be buried again if we continue to wait. So this was a smaller group, but intense, about 7% of the replies, and they were focused on mortality and urgency. And finally, the last point was just calls for more photos and real evidence. And when I interviewed Dr. Shadagis, that's what he said. He was saying is, where are the bodies? Where is the physical craft? Where is the hard evidence? That's really want to see instead of just talking heads. I mean, I think both of those points are important, but would you just not take the witness testimony because we don't have the physical evidence because it's locked up in vaults? I think we can just take what we can get and hope for the best. So really, in summary, the 2 loudest buckets are the PSYOP versus the nothing new reactions. So 108 replies were PSYOP. It's a controlled narrative. Basically, they're saying that this is managed disclosure, it's a scripted narrative, info control, and that they have some nefarious purpose ultimately to try and release this information. And then the second, nothing new, recycled info, that was 93 replies. And that's basically people saying that the details are already known about this and that this adds no new hard evidence. And these two themes account for over 65% of categorized replies. So at least people who follow me on X, over 65% adhere to one of these two buckets. And just to push back on that, I agree. It does seem like it's managed disclosure. A lot of these people still have security clearances, so they are actively working in the government. But the opposing side of that is if the government is truly keeping this information secret and holding it within, then how else are we going to find out about that information and hopefully get it released in the future is from people inside the government, right? People that were working on the program. So I think ultimately we will need to listen to these people and obviously take it all with a grain of salt. But if we don't listen to them, then we're not going to get any information, at least from the inside. And the second point was there was nothing new. It was all recycled info. And I do agree a lot of it was recycled info, but a lot of it wasn't new, right? All the stuff from Jay Stratton, him saying that he's seen alien bodies and craft with his bare eyes, right? That was really released in this video. And yeah, you saw that in the trailer before, but without this movie being released and produced, that may not have come out. Plus, there were a couple other Air Force witnesses that I hadn't heard before. I thought that was quite interesting. Okay, and then finally, we had the highest engagement replies. So these are the replies other people amplified the most by liking, essentially. So Archaics138, he had 58 likes, or they had 58 likes, and their theme is the PSYOP, the controlled narrative. Asdasmos2, 47 likes, and that theme was Lazar-style warp, space-time description. WK Bursk, 41 likes. The theme was nothing new, recycled info. UFO Skeptic Hub had 30 likes for the intentional crash theory. And then Gesticart got 29 likes. The theme was Rubio as almost disclosure moment. And that is really key, right? Marco Rubio has said some amazing things, and he's certainly in a very powerful position. So I think that can only be a good thing, right? Hopefully Congress can keep pushing on this. Okay, thanks for staying to the end. For me personally, the big surprise in the Age of Disclosure was Jay Stratton himself. Actually, I didn't really know his full backstory before this. And when you hear how many deployments he did into real war zones, that just landed differently for me. I don't know if he has somewhat of a negative reputation, UAP task force lead, etc. But if you deployed that many times to that many war zones, in my mind, I think that is patriotism. You don't put your body and your family through that many deployments unless you actually care about the country, I think, and the people next to you. So when a guy with that kind of resume looks into the camera and calmly says that crash retrievals exist, there's a Manhattan Project on steroids, and that he's seen NHI craft and bodies with his own eyes, it just made an impact in me. I also thought the Bush story was wild. The film presents this claim that George H.W. Bush, of all people, privately confirmed knowledge of an early UFO encounter in New Mexico in the 1960s. So it wasn't in like a joking way, but as part of this long running behind the scenes awareness at the very top of government. So you don't have to believe it, but it's one of those details that does make you stop and say, okay, if that's even half true, then, the world is not what most people think it is. The other thing that grabbed me was the Air Force testimony. So you have people like Colonel James Cobb, a former NORAD Vice Director of Operations, talking about UAP in the context of real-world air defense and air safety. You got Robert Salas describing nukes going offline during a UFO event in the 60s, and Robert Jacobs talking about a missile test. Craft interferes with the warhead on film. I've covered both of those in past videos. Those should land hard. And Bob Salas and Robert Jacobs have not been at a UAP hearing, and I think they really should, right? I think that would make a big difference having Air Force officers talking about this stuff, even extremely credible people. So for my reaction overall, I don't think this film answers everything like Dr. Shadagas says, where is the hard evidence? Where's the cross retrievals? Where's the photos and the videos? Like he says, just talkie. But I do think it's probably the one movie I'd recommend to anyone who's brand new to the UAP topic. So if a friend or a family member says, okay, show me one thing that'll catch me up on why you take this so seriously, Age of Disclosure is probably the first thing I'd send them to watch. So Martin Willis, he's been in this game for several decades. He said it's the best documentary that he's seen on the topic. And yes, you may not agree with the controlled narrative. You may have issues with this just being a recycling of information that we've seen in the past, but I do think there was some new nuggets of information. And I think overall, it's probably the best UAP documentary that I've seen, at least. But let me know if you agree. Write it down in the comments. Try and read all the comments. Please be respectful, or you can reply to that X post as well. I appreciate all you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button. Please share the videos. I know a lot of you aren't getting notifications on my videos. YouTube does not like my channel anymore. And so it's difficult, but I'll release videos every Tuesday and Friday. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.